today's meeting is about parental advisory groups. That's why we're all here, right? PAGs? No. So today's to provide information and understanding on how the process works today. It's to understand the issues, the challenges, and the problems that we've got with the system today. To consider options, to achieve some consensus on path forward. And then finally, just what we're doing is consistent with the approach we're taking around consultation and discussion, so that we consult and include that we're looking to do. This work is about supporting churches. It's not actually diocesan. This is supporting churches and the strategy there, direction we want to go in. And then finally, just the technology, being able to do this, not only with people in the room, but people online around the diocese. And then finally, for people afterwards to be able to watch it online if they weren't able to participate today. So what's a PAG? It's not parental, sorry, Fred?
Will there be hard copies for us?
There'll be hard copies available online. Okay. We'll post them on the website. We try not to print where we don't have to. PAG, pre-authorized giving, right? So the short form of it, it's a direct program that allows people to support their church through an automatic withdrawal or an automatic charge to their credit card. It allows for the congregation members to give intentionally, in a planned way, proportionally and faithfully to their church, even when they're not necessarily in church. And then finally, it helps the church by being able to have a dependable flow of contributions. It makes budgeting a little easier because you know what to expect, and it reduces the amount of paperwork. In the Diocese of Ontario, there is a brochure that's been around for some time that's got the authorization form on it and a little bit of information to support that. One of the things that's just worth noting on that first picture is the little card, because part of this is about humans, and part of this is about how people feel. We're used to putting something on the plate, so it's kind of odd when the plate goes and you just pass it by. So part of the practice of PAG is being able to provide something for folks to be able to put on the plate, so that the people around them aren't going to look at them and go, cheap, or around them and they're not going to feel about themselves, right? So it allows you to feel like you're putting an offering in the plate. So let's put a few, and that's the background of the other side. Some of those brochures are here. Did have a few of them about. So let's look at a few facts. So the program was first introduced in the Diocese of Ontario in 2002, part of a stewardship program. When it began, after it got started up, it was about $8,000 a month was processed, just under $100,000 a year. So 3 years later, by 2005, that had gone up to $40,000 a month, just under $500,000 a year. And there was about 475 individual donors, and that averages, just based on that, 40,000 divided by 475, $85 per month per giver. If you look at our current state, it's about $125,000 a month, which translates to close to $1.5 million a year. There's approximately 1,200 donors, individual donors, and the average is about, again, doing the math, about $105 per month per giver. It varies greatly, but that is kind of the average. About 60% of the transactions are debit, and about 40% are credit cards. That seems to be shifting. One of the things that is clear, partly one theory is that as folks get older, they're not traveling as much, and therefore you're not accumulating points. Credit cards come with fees, credit cards come a lot of reasons, but it is in general tipping more and more towards debit than credit. On an average month, there's about 50 changes or additions to the debit side and about 25 updates or changes to the credit card side. So there's about 75 changes per month out of those 1,200 givers. And by the way, there is no canon or policy that covers, like there's nothing that requires parishes to use the diocesan system. There is no canon that outlines there must be a system. There is no policy wrapped around this. This is something that was set up back in 2002 as a service. The other element that's often asked about is what are the costs? When they started, debit was about 45 cents per transaction. Doesn't matter if you do a 10 cent or $1 debit or whether you do $100,000. It's 45 cents then. That's now come down to 11 cents. So each debit each month is a 11 cent cost. For credit cards, they are not based upon flat fees, they're based upon percentages. They too have come down over time. Visa right now is running at 2.23%. So if someone gives $100 a month, then $2.23 will go to the processing from the bank. MasterCard is 2.95, so it's slightly higher, 2.295, sorry. And the fees are netted out from the contributions. So what the parish or church receives is the donation net of the fees that the bank has charged. There are no diocesan fees applied, right? The work that goes into this is paid for at a CMM. So a little bit of background in terms of how it's set up. It's basically set up the same as it was when it was originally begun back in 2002. Scotiabank provides the debit and credit systems. They are separate systems. So they have the debit system is actually an older platform. It's a very manually intense process that uses an old, on a PC-based application software that's batch oriented. So each church has a batch that goes through, and each month there has to be a new batch created for each church. So it's manually intensive, and because of the way the software is, because it's old, it's not as easy to use, it's more prone to error. So once the system, and by the way, the credit system for Scotiabank evolved to an online. It's a web-based one. It's a lot better. So these systems, basically, by the cutoff date, you go in and process what donors there are, what the source of the donation is, and where it's coming out of, how much it is. And then what the system does is it goes in to that bank account, your bank account or your credit card on the date and charges or withdraws that amount of money, and it deposits that money into a Scotiabank clearing account. And the debit system could be on the day, which is generally the 25th, but the bank's commitment is anywhere in the 3 business days after that date. So it could be the 25th, 26th, 27th, or if there happens to be a weekend or a long weekend in there, it could move out from Friday the 25th. It could be out on Tuesday, several days later. One of the challenges with the old batch-based system. And then once the money's been into the clearing account, then we have to go in and set up so that it now distributes that money according to the batch. So there has to be another batch created that now goes in and says, okay, there was $464 came in for St. John's, that goes to St. John's account, $385 for St. Switham's, and then what it does is, again, with a 1 to 3 day window, it then sends that money out. And then finally, it produces reports so they can be distributed so the church knows how much was given, who gave it, and how much the receipt. One of the challenges we discovered as we started to work through this isn't really documented. And I've written it up on one chart. That's what we did sitting in the boardroom on our whiteboard to actually document the flow of how this works, right? It's never been documented and written down. Now that's, not intended, we're not going to walk through this step by step, but that basically we are going to produce a document out of this because that's the amount of stuff that has to go in from the start to the finish. So, looking at where our challenges are. So the first one is around the tools in the service. So as I mentioned, the tools are dated. The debit system is the original one from 2002. How many folks are still using software on their PCs? I won't ask you about iPhones or Androids, they didn't exist in 2002. But how many are still using software on a PC from 2000 they bought 2002? Yeah. So that's one of the challenges. It's a little dated. It's got issues around that. The complexity and the lack of user friendliness creates opportunities for error. We talked about the timing. The credit cards are generally on time. The debit goes within that 3 days. One of the challenges, you don't get notice when there's issues. You don't actually figure out there's been a problem until after, when either someone at the parish says it didn't come out, or you look at the report when you work your way through the reports line by line. A good example of that, and the next point, which is unknowns. So in the month of February, we had a major hiccup. It affected everybody. And Joyce has did a bunch of detective work afterwards to figure out what it was. In 2002, when this was set up, the bank said, much like all of us have, if on my debit card, the bank will only let me take out a certain amount per day. Well, the bank assigned the same amount. Now, back in 2002, we were talking about $8,000 a month. So the bank put a $125,000 limit per day for how much could be processed. In February, it was $125,400. And instead of course, the $400 tipping over and not running, the whole batch failed. And of course, that's St. Pete. So yes, the whole batch failed. And the bank, of course, didn't notify us. So once, of course, we found there's a problem and Joyce got digging, discovered that none of it had processed. And then off you go. And then you get into the issue of it's days later, towards the end of the month, and when it is processed, it's the next month. And then folks are saying, you took two out of me last month. You took one out the first few days of March, and then you took another one out the 25th of March, right? And there's ways of interpreting that. So that's some of the issues that are there with the system. The other side is looking at the process. So there's many ways that input and many places that input comes from. On these forms, it says, how do I enroll? If your parish congregation is participating, the enrollment procedure is as follows. Decide on the amount, fill out the form, sign the form, insert the completed form in a void check or credit card on an envelope, put it on the collection plate. Right? It also says, oh wait, you can contact the diocese. Right? That you can send it. So what we do is we get individual forms that come into our office from individual givers. and then you sort of work your way back through this. So then when it goes back to the church, it's a bit of a surprise, isn't it? Or someone takes it and puts it on the plate, and then it works its way through. Who handles it? And I bet you if I went around to all the tables, who handles these things in your church? Well, in some case, it'll be the clergy, because they're nice people. In other cases, it'll be a warden. In other cases, it'll be the treasurer. In other cases, it might be the envelope secretary. In other places, it might be Jack, because, I don't know, Jack did it when we started this, and Jack's just always done it. And the other problem that we then get into is someone says, well, I'm just going to send Joyce an email. Hey, Joyce, I want to cancel my PAG. I want to change my PAG. And of course, an email can be a variety of things. So we have issues there. Some people will phone in. Someone may call in and say, I didn't like the sermon last Sunday. I want to change my PAG. And it sounds funny, but it's actually true. For those on the bridge, there's a lot of fingers being pointed in the room at this point. So it flexes, and as I said, there's 75 changes a month. Some of those are new people signing up, but so there's no control from our end to be able to say, is it real? I mean, how do we know, by the way, that poor Gladys, that's 92, didn't really mean to tell you to go from $10 a week to $100 a week? We don't have any controls or checks on that. We don't have any audit trail when someone comes in and says, how did my PAG get changed from $10 a week to $100 a week? How did that happen? Who did that? I never authorized that. So there's many places it comes from, many ways it comes from. Not all of the input is documented. Sometimes a change takes a lot of time. Right? There's cases where Joyce works through 6 or 7 calls or emails to get through with somebody to make a change. And the thing that as we step back and look at it, it's a parish-centric relationship. The people that are giving money are not giving money to the diocese. Well, through CMM they are, but they're giving money to their church. They're putting money as their thanks offering, as they're on the plate in that place. They just happen to be doing it virtually. So one of the issues is that relationship should be at the local level. And by the way, if Bill Clark delivers a stellar sermon on Sunday and someone wants to up their PAG, Bill should hear that. Or the wardens there should hear that.
I mean, I paid for it.
It shouldn't necessarily be somebody coming into Joyce and going, wait a minute. Right? So that the relationship is at the parish level. The wardens, the giver, the wardens, it's at the parish level. And that the way we're set up right now breaks that. Final thing, it's a little bit time intensive. Takes about 30 hours of mostly Joyce's time each month. Not necessarily a bad thing to invest that, but it is time intensive partly because of how cumbersome the process and the tools are. And finally, and we've done this once, that we're reliant on a single person. Right? Joyce runs this. It's not documented. We've started that process, but if something happened to Joyce tomorrow, we have a problem. And that's not at all a good situation. So when I kind of summarize where we are, we've got a much higher volume of donors and transactions. We got a high volume of changes. We've got variability in timing and the complexity of the tools and difficulty knowing when there's a problem and how to get at it. What that translates to, there's problems. We've had issues with transactions, there's challenges, and then it starts to become absolute craziness in trying to deal with figuring out where the problems are while you're trying to sort people out. It becomes very difficult. That's where we are. Okay, let me go on then to talk about where we can go from here. So the one is, as part of this, we examined alternatives. And when this started out, one of the reasons that Bank of Nova Scotia in those days was selected was because they were one of the few that had a tool that could do both. Now there's a ton of alternatives. The United Church offers a platform that can be used. Canada Helps. Most churches are registered on Canada Helps. PayPal. You can do such things through PayPal. The major banks all offer some form of platform, and then there's a whole lot of other ones. There's neat things, by the way, that are focused more at millennial types. But I looked at a company that offers an app that's for sort of those crowd events. Somebody on the bridge is doing the dishes. So when something bad happens, and one of the vigils, for example, that the bishop attends, that respond to a very tragic situation in the world, there's apps where you can now text donations from your phone. That someone would simply say, if you text 47375 and an amount, that'll get charged to your Rogers account. There's apps that you can do with a group so everybody could sit. There's a million different ways now for you to donate money. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So there's all kinds of alternatives. Those alternatives have varying fee structures, right? Some of them can run 4 or 5% on credit cards. Some of them are like the United Church one, run up but then cap, I think at $45 a month for transaction fees. So again, depending on how big you are, that may or may not. Some are simpler than others. And some assume the donor's going to handle a bunch of this. And again, some of the folks that do PAGs in our churches may not necessarily go to a website or an app to be able to actually set up their PAG. So there's all kinds of alternatives that are out there. So we then considered what our options are to bubble this down. One option is the status quo. Keep doing what we've done for the last number of years. I would argue that is an option. I would argue that's not an acceptable option. We just plain have too many issues. So, peace, but no. The second one is to say, let's get the diocese out of this. Right? That is to identify alternatives so that churches can take this on their own and then support the transition. So basically identify, for example, the Bank of Montreal that we've been working with now, and say rather than the diocese setting up, each church can have their own. Somebody from the church goes in, runs does the monthly submissions, right? Processes the stuff to get the money in and handles it from there. The good part of that is it keeps the relationship and the information all at the church level. However, as we work it through, and for a lot of churches that may well make sense. However, not all churches are either able or willing to do that. And that's taking on the management of it and the processing of it. Right? Some of our treasurers that are going, I can't keep doing what I'm doing, let alone now go to a web page and I got to now enter, and so all this stuff's got to come to me, and then I've got to worry about the complaints and everything else. Okay. The other one that strikes is you've got to be careful about data privacy and security, because you're now working stuff on a PC. That PC ends up being hacked. You've got people's financial data going out on that PC. So your church or your home network need to have the security protocols in place to make sure, and some of our churches get hacked. Right? Whether it's a phishing scam, whether it's a email there's different ways, but the only thing you've got to be careful is to make sure there's sufficient security inside the house. And then the final thing is the diocese gets with BMO, we get an 80-90% discount. So what we've done is we've centralized, we're in the process of centralizing all of our banking with Bank of Montreal. We were in different places. We dealt with TD Bank, we dealt with Bank of Nova Scotia, we dealt with Bank of Montreal. Bank of Montreal has always been our primary bank for banking, but we've got different things from different places. So part of what we get out of BMO is a significant saving on all of our fees. So that we would try and pass that along, right? But we'd have to work that through. But it is an option. The final one is we've looked at how we redesign and retool our own system. I look at, as I've mentioned, Bank of Montreal, BMO, is simpler, the faster, and more reliable. We use them with our payroll system. Those that are aware, at the end of the year, we got off of a third-party payroll system, ADP, and we moved to our own system. So now, basically, when Joyce goes home on the 15th of the month, and she hits the button that releases the file, later that night, we all get paid. The batch processing is that quick. The reporting is there. What we can then have is consistency across both sets, the credit cards and the debits, the speed. We then change the process to tighten up the change process and keep the relationship in the church. So what we'd look to do is to have someone in each church identified as the coordinator. That person changes you would not call into the diocesan center, that you would deal with the person in the church. And that could be with a form, it can be, by the office, an email, whatever, but within the church would consolidate the changes for that church, and that the relationship with the donors is in the church. So that also means if someone decides they want to make a change, someone in the church knows. You're not finding out about it when we process it at the other end. The relationship with the church is there. And finally, from an authentication point of view, we get a document that's got a signature on it from who we know. If Doug Noyles is the coordinator, we know that that's where it comes from, and that now gets filed, and we've got the record of it. And then there's other opportunities using the platform for other enhancements. So for example, debit credit. We Anglicans aren't quite as fast forward thinking as some of the other denominations. Friends of mine go to other churches where actually the sides people carry swipe machines. Or they have one at the back of the church where you can, before the service, swipe, if you do a one-timer, swipe, make your payment, and then get either a little token or a slip that then goes on to, you can then put on the plate. I tongue-in-cheek put that on there. God accepts credit cards and your personal check. Thank you, come again. But other things that aren't quite as, that are a little humorous to look at, but think about it, we now have several churches, and the cathedral is one of the leaders, where they're live streaming services, every service. Christ Church here, live stream every service. How do the people that take part in that service, how do they have the opportunity to give? So there are ways to do that in real time, right? Now, without necessarily going as far as preferred seating. All of our cash seaters are in the front pew, all of the online credit cards and checks, and of course, that you can tell that wasn't done by an Anglican because cash is king and nobody sits at the front of the church. The preferred seating in an Anglican church is at the back, not at the front. But, I get my cartoons where I can. But it does talk about how we need to start thinking about as we move forward, as people are part of community, right, that there's alternative ways. So whatever, as we make changes, you want to allow for that to happen. It's not going to say that an individual church may decide to make it happen, but it says that the platforms we're using are open to being able to do that. So as we wind this up to from a recommendation point of view, on behalf of the finance team at the diocese, our recommendation is that, first of all, parishes or churches that want to take it on locally are absolutely free to do so. And we can provide consulting help or transition support to make that work. So that is clearly an option. A number of people have asked that. That's clearly an option. Choose your own platform, or we'll help with the one that we're going to use, and you can take on the processing locally. Peace. The second thing is we are going, because our assumption is not all of our churches will be able to or want to move to a self-managed capability. So we will move our platform to the BMO platform for both debit and credit. In either case, there needs to be a work on the relationship and process side. So whether that's done locally or whether that's done fed back into the diocesan office, the sign-up processes, the changing processes, and the cancellations need to have paper trails, right? And that needs to be done, if it's done locally, it can be the person that's processing the change. If it's done into us, then that person would then provide that either by scan or back into the office, but we would then look for the paperwork. There'd be a deadline for that says if you want things in for the May, you've got to have it in by, just like we do with payroll. If you need it in, it has to be in by this date in order to be processed by this date. And that tightens up the process, the timing, documentation, and the clarity on input. So the proposal is that we would, on the diocesan side, work the planning details out in May, and that would be working through implementation help for those that want to move away, working with those on our own process, and working with those. In June, we would start into implementing it, so the forms and the training, because we would look to do training for the parish side. Say, here's the form. It's not complex training, but here's the form. Here's when it's got to be in by. And then we'd look to cut over to the new system for July processing. And the bank in the past has allowed us to run a dummy set of transactions through. So they will let us test the system. We did that with our payroll change. They'll let us test that as well. Question?
Will people that are on PAG now have to sign up again?
No. We will, for those, what we'll end up doing is for those that are already in the system, it'll continue forward. Once we implement, though, to make a change, you can't just call Joyce anymore and make a change. You'd need
Email per month to Joyce for any changes?
from the church. If you're the coordinator, then you'd send that in to her, and that would be the way we'd handle it. Yeah. But as far as those that already are there, it would be transparent. Other than the fact that it should have less issues. So that's kind of the piece through that. It would, we would spend the time in the month of June making sure that things are up and running, that things work properly. We'd run a test run. July was when the system would actually take. The one thing that I'll just put out there is that we've used for many years the 25th of the month as the withdrawal date. One of the questions is that the right date? Would it be more convenient, and I know most people then build their monthly cash flows around things, but I don't know. One of the things we could entertain is picking a different day. If you wanted to make it the 5th of the month, or you wanted to make it, we could look at as a total piece moving that date. So with that, we'll move to questions, deep philosophical pondering, If anybody wants to be angry, anybody wants to be happy, all of the above. All right, well, thank you to everybody on the bridge. If anyone has comments, drop me an email. If you get those that were on the bridge, comments around how it worked for you. We are still adapting and evolving our system, but do let me know. And thank you to everybody that is in the room. Thank you for your input and your candor. Take care.